Hello. It's time to talk about variables. We've been doing lots of things about programming techniques like functions and loops and ifs. Now we want to concentrate on having more variables. And I'll start this with a simple problem. So here's the problem I want to think about. Roll a 6-sided die and count the number of times we roll one, number of twos, number of threes, and so on. We did something like this earlier where we were just doing we weren't doing all the possibilities. But how could we do this if we wanted to do it for all 6 possibilities? Well, we need 6 counters. To do this, we need 6 counters. Well, I don't want to name things 6 different names. That seems like an awful lot of work. And especially if I were going higher, if I had 12-sided, or I had 2 die and I wanted all the possibilities on those 2 die. 3, 1, 5, 2, the different kinds of combinations. So I want a way to have one variable with lots of parts. Now, in Python, we have the concept of a list. In a list, you can have as many things as you want, and then you access each item in the list by an index telling which one of them you want. We have a very similar thing in C++. In C++, we have an array. An array is a group of variables, all of the same type, with a name and accessible by an integer, a positive integer, I should say. Integer. I'm not getting that spelt right, am I? Maybe I'll make it there. I don't know if I'll ever make it. I'll just give up. All right, so as an example, we can declare a variable this way. Int counts bracket 6. That has declared a 6-element variable. We have 6 variables. The 6 variables are counts, bracket 0, counts, bracket 1, counts, bracket 2, counts, bracket 3 counts, bracket 4 counts, bracket 5. Now you should notice something about that. Take a look at that. Is it different than you might have expected it to be? There are 6 elements. A lot of people would have 1 through 6, wouldn't they? We don't. That's because all arrays are what is called zero-based. The first index for an array element is 0, not 1. Now that's given lots of people lots of trouble, but you have to get used to it. Computer scientists start counting with 0. The reason for this is the way that an array is stored. It's stored in consecutive places in the computer. So the computer can just take the index and add it to the address of the first element and get the nth element, where n is 0-based. So it's a practical device on how the internal works go on in the computer. Now, each of those variables is a separate variable. Each of them is an integer. We don't need to bring in any include files to do this. We don't have to have a special word like array. The machine recognizes what we have there as an array. There's another point you might notice. We use the square brackets. Think why we might not use the other brackets. The curlicue brackets are already in use as the braces for things like the statements that are put together that are if controls, or the entire program. So we can't use those. What are the parentheses in use for? Why can't we use them? Think about it. Why? We cannot use the parents because they indicate a function. So this is purely necessary. We have to have some symbol, and it's too much work to use parentheses, so we have to get used to brackets. And the funny thing is, in the old days, we did use parentheses, but the newer languages don't do that. They need parentheses for functions. So let's see how we could write a program to handle this. I'm just going to roll die. There's no problem with that. Let me go back for a minute to here. Wrong place. That one I want to close. And now I'll go back to here and see what we have. Well, let's see. We did a row here. So if we were to include all of these and the SRAN time, we'd be able to do rows again. So that's just the way to make sure that I don't make any mistakes and leave any of those things out. Now I'm going to produce a new function, a new project, and we'll just do die row And that's good enough. That's a reasonable name for it, die row. Yeah. And then I wish to create it. Now I'll put in what I copied. I will still have the main, but I'm going to start off by buying my die. That's what I consider that. I gotta undo what I just did. SRAN times null is what goes in there. So it's SRAN time null. So I now have the die. I'm going to declare the counts, bracket 6, and I'm going to try something. I'm going to say 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and that's it. That's an initialization. You notice I initialized them six variables. Unfortunately, C++ doesn't have the tricks that Python has to do that. If I remember, there's a way to write like 6 times 0 or 6x 0 or something that would allow less typing, but we don't have that. So I've just initialized the counters to 6. Now I just roll the die. For int row equal 1, row less than or equal to 30,000, row plus plus. I'm going to have, I shouldn't have that name, for times 1 times less than or equal to 30,000 times. And now I'll use row to equal ran mod. Now be careful of this. You need 6 different values, and those will be 6 through 5, 0 through 5. So you have to make it 6 plus 1. Remember that ran returns the remainder. That didn't work. Not having a great typing day here. I can see that. Now let's try it again. For int times equal 1 times less than or equal to 30,000 times plus plus, do the following, and then I'm going to put the int in front of row, which I forgot to do. Now, think back to what we did, or what you should be doing in the drunken sailor problem. There you had to have a lot of ifs. If it was 1, you did this. If it was 2, you did that. If it was 3, you did that. Oh, one way to do this is the same way. If we roll a 1, add 1 to the count. For counts 1, the count 0. If we add 2, add it to counts 1. Remember, we're 1 off with 0 through 6. 0 through 5, not 1 through 6. But I don't want to do that. It's too much work. So I'm just going to say counts the row minus 1. Now I did that because I'd like the rows to have the same numbers, but I'm putting them in 0. The number of ones is going to be counted in row 0. Inside that bracket, I can do any arithmetic that will guarantee me an integer, a positive integer. So I can subtract 1 from it. There's no problem in doing that. And now I'll just say plus plus. Remember, counts, bracket, something, bracket is a variable. I can do to it whatever I do to other variables. I have just completed 30,000 rows. Done. Now all I have to do is print it out. So I'll say for int num equal 1, num less than or equal to 6, num plus plus. I am going to print out we rolled, and then I'm going to put num in, and then I'm going to tell you how many times. So I guess I better put I better leave some room there. And then I'm going to put counts num minus 1 times backslash n, and then the semicolon. Now, if I haven't made any of my usual mistakes, that should work. But let's see. Now it's time to close that. And then it's time for the return 0. And I should be able to close the entire program. Oops. There it is. Now the machine is complaining because I made a bad mistake up here. Typed the wrong thing. But outside of that, it looks okay. So let's see if it works. There were build errors. So that's good. That is not a problem. That is just a warning. This is a problem. It's saying missing semicolon before bracket, before brace. Now I see a semicolon, so I don't know yet why that is happening. It may be someplace further up. There's a syntax error on that line. So I'm just going to retype the line and hope that it was just a typo I didn't see, which it was. And there's my answer. Now it looks pretty good. I would expect about 5,000 of each of them, and I have around 5,000 of each of them. They go from 4854 to 5,074. It's a little low on 4s, so let's run it again. Well, this time 4 is still a little low, but it's higher than 2 others, so I don't think the die is biased. So there's our program. I hope that you don't find it too difficult. Most of you probably had something like it in Python. I know some of you did not, but hopefully you can pick this up. And if you can't, you're welcome to call me, and I'll go through it in more detail for you, individually or with a group. The idea, again, is that we can have sort of an apartment house for variables. We have the street address for the apartment house. That's the name of the array, and then each room in there is numbered. And we number them from 0 to whatever we need to number all the rooms. Your dorms are probably that way too. You number them from whatever to whatever. So that's an array. Now, a couple of things. Those of you who had extensive Python may remember something called a slice, where you get a portion of a list, say the 5th element to the 8th element. No such thing in C++. Does not exist, period. That's the way it is. You notice that we can put values into the various elements. It's quite easy. There's no particular problem in doing those things. So that's what I wanted to say about, for my first run on talking about arrays. We'll find out that there's a disadvantage of arrays in C++ that isn't there for, is sad. It's a problem. We have to declare how big the array is ahead of time. What if we don't know? What if the array could be many different, could be bigger or smaller depending on the data that we put in? How can we vary the size of an array? The answer is we can't. But C++ has another concept, another data structure. This is called a data structure, called a vector. And it looks and acts, and I guess the word is it walks like a duck, and it is a duck. It looks like a vector. It looks like an array, but it isn't. And it has some very nice features. Some people prefer to use vectors rather than arrays. But both of them are in use pretty widely. I'm going to do one other thing with this program, something I haven't done yet. I want to go back to the program. This program always rows 30,000 times. I don't want to always row 30,000. I want to write this program so I could change that. So what if I do this? What if I put in num row? And then I go up here and I say const int num row equal 120,000. That's a constant. And you write your program using the name of the constant. And then, if you want to change the program, you change one line. That's it. So I'll put this here. This is the use of a constant. Oh, wrong problem. That's coming later. So I'll just go to a new line. Use of a named constant. And I'll have my example. And I'll put up here const is constant. The idea is that to change some value used in the array, in the program, we only have to change this one line. We have to recompile it. But we don't have to rewrite the whole thing. We don't have to go through and find every place we use 30,000 or 120,000 or whatever. This time I only used it once, but there'll be other places where I could use it much more than that. So it's a very useful process. Now, where does it go? You notice I put it outside of the int main. The reason for that is that that const is what I call a global variable. That is, it is available to everything from line 10 down to the end of the program. If there were functions there, and I put their definitions starting at line 11, they too would be able to use 120,000. This is the concept of scope. It says that num_row is known in the entire program and functions because I put it ahead of them. Now, to show you the non-global, times. Times is not known outside that for loop. Technically, if you use the word times anywhere but lines 16, 17, 15, and 18, you're going to get an undefined variable. I say technically because some machines may let it go by. I don't know. The same thing down here. Num is only available in that for loop. In fact, row is only available in that for loop there. These are local variables. Usually we speak of variables that are local to a function. The parameter names in the function are local to the function. But we can have things local like this too, local to a for loop or a while loop or something like that. So that's an idea that you've got to start thinking about. Where are variables known? Their scope. Now, before I finish, I want to say one other thing. First, I want to save this. Oh, I got to run it. Pardon me. Didn't do badly. 20,000 each, roughly. All right, now I can save it. All right, I've graded 1 through 5, I believe it is, of programs that came in through the Dropbox. I'm currently going through my emails and finding anything from 1 to 5 that you sent in that way for one reason or another. I should have that done in a day or so. There's one warning I have. One of the compilers, it may be Xcode, is more lenient than my compiler. Xcode allows you to use a variable that you haven't put a value into yet. I've had several cases of it where on my program, in my computer, with C++ from Visual Studio, I get an error message. But the student who's running it does not get an error message. If this happens, if I know it's that kind of error, if I can tell that's what the problem is, I send you a message saying, show me a screen dump of the program running, and then I give you credit for it. So that's happened a few times. It's going to probably happen a few more times. To be on the safe side, you're always supposed to initialize a variable either by giving it a value or reading a value into it. And that compiler is not enforcing that rule. There may be other rules it doesn't enforce. Again, you're going to understand sooner or later that things are not standardized. A program that'll run in one C++ might not run in the next one. The companies were never able to make it standard. There is a standard, and all compilers are supposed to obey it, but don't believe it. So I'll see you later. Bye now. Have a good weekend.